Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Civic Power Talk this evening. And here with us, we have our very own Black Voice News Executive Editor, Stephanie Williams. And I am Christen Irving, the Director of Revenue and Audience Engagement for Black Voice News. So we're excited to be here today, talk to you about voting, the importance of voting, a little bit about the history, and just some ways to encourage you to participate in the upcoming election this coming Tuesday, June 2nd. So let's get right into it. Stephanie, would you like to give a brief introduction of yourself before we get started?
Well, yes, thank you, Christian, for having me this evening, and welcome to our audience. I'm excited to be here. I'm always excited to have an opportunity to talk about politics at all levels of government. So, Christian, I'm ready to get started whenever you are.
All right, let's get into it. So, first question. We have a midterm election coming up Tuesday, and yet there continues to be many of our friends and neighbors who don't feel inspired or compelled to vote. Why do you think voting is so important?
That's a great question. I think most often when we think about politics, our minds quickly jump to the presidential races, what's happening at the national level, and we also think about the fact that we need to elect the right people to Congress, elect the right senators, and so forth. And don't get me wrong, we know that national elections matter because during presidential elections, we're not only selecting a president, we're setting the stage for that president to potentially appoint Supreme Court justices who we know serve for life, and their decisions have just immense power and control over our lives and the lives of our children.
Right.
So we see this. An example of this, especially in some of the recent Supreme Court decisions, like Citizens United, for example, that occurred in 2010, that allowed this unlimited influx of money into politics. And that has basically enabled some people to buy elections, so to speak. We also saw it again in Shelby County versus Holder, and that decision was made in 2013, and that basically destroyed um, the Voting Rights Act for the African American community. And then again, more recently, in the Supreme Court decision of Louisiana versus Kalis, that unraveled the last remaining vestiges of the Voting Rights Act by destroying Section 2. So, electing a president, I think we really need to start talking more about the role that the president plays in electing Supreme Court justices, because that really got us in a pickle in the last two presidential election. I shouldn't say the last two, the last four presidential election cycles. And so we need to make sure that we are well educated about the connection between the two going forward in time. Now, that being said, this year, although it's not a presidential election year, we still, as voters, have a very important mission, and that is to ensure that the people we elect to the U.S. House of Representatives and to our state houses and to our local government seats, uh, actually do represent our values. And this is even more critical today because of the need to offset seats due to gerrymandering and restrictive voter laws being passed in Republican, or I should say, red led states at the behest of our president. Um, so, for us to offset the loss of those seats, it's important that we get in there and cast our votes for and seek to elect as many right thinking candidates to the U.S. House of Representatives as possible. And our votes are critical in this election from a national perspective. That we because we need a very powerful voice of reason or voices of reason in opposition to the current direction of this country, or I should say this nation.
You know, you make a good point about how our votes matter at the national level, but this is not a presidential election year, and voter turnout is historically lower during these election cycles. Um, we do have a big election in California for governor this year as well. What are your thoughts about voter participation in that regard?
Well, you make a really, I'm kind of glad that you asked that question, and you make a really important point that voter turnout is notably lower during off presidential election year cycles. And this is one of the main reasons we will have our Riverside County Sheriff and District Attorney in office for another 2 years this cycle beyond their traditional 4 year terms that should have ended this year. And that's because a couple of years ago, the state legislature voted to move the election of county sheriffs and district attorneys in what are called general law counties, like Riverside County. A general law county is a county that doesn't have its own charter, like San Bernardino, for example. And as a result, these counties, like Riverside, must follow uh, the mandates of the state. And so the state has determined that these positions of county sheriff and district attorney are, are too important to be left to these off year election cycles when the voter turnout is so low that a handful of voters elect people to these very important decisions. So by now having them on presidential election cycles, we have a better chance of more of the constituents turning out and weighing in on who should lead Riverside County as sheriff and as district attorney. And I just use this as an example to help dramatize the importance of local elections for statewide, county, city, and other municipal offices, and why it's important for us to vote. Realistically, I'm sure you know this, Christian, because you're out there and spend so much time interacting with people in the community, that although federal elections weigh heavily, state elections really have a more direct impact on the daily lives of our local residents. However, all the money in politics kind of enables the national media, and I'm going to say social media as well, to nearly drown out the voices of candidates in local elections. And that's one of the many reasons why local media outlets like Black Voice News and the many others in our hub are so important, because as much as possible, we attempt to be a platform to help make local constituents aware of their candidates and those candidates' platforms. And the bottom line regarding state elections is that for us here in California, as well as in states across the country, the governor really has more power than the president for the most part when it comes to decisions that impact the residents of our state. Now, that may seem a little unusual, but it's true, and this includes everything from taxes and policing to education, to the courts, to our healthcare system, and even to how the elections themselves are run. So that is a state decision and not a federal decision. And the governor and the state assembly and senate have power over these decisions, and that's another reason that our state elections are so important. And often we see our state officials making important decisions long before action is taken at the national level.
Mm.
And from my point of view, state elections are really, often too often underestimated. And yet, we know that when we make the wrong choice here in California, when we don't show up at the polls, and or if we show up at the polls and cast our ballot for people who do not have our best interest at heart, we know that those consequences can be devastating. And we've seen that here in California, even as a blue state. We've elected what I call red state minded leaders, like go back to Republican Pete Wilson, for example, who was, he made no secret about his anti-LGBTQ plus focus or his targeting of immigrants. Or we can look back more recently to Ronald Reagan, for example, with his hateful attitude toward civil rights and affirmative action. And we know that he, made a lot of very derogatory racial slurs that were aimed at Black people. So again, showing up at the polls is really important, because even though we are traditionally a blue state, it doesn't mean that we always swing blue. Um, so when it comes,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. You can finish.
Okay, I was just going to say that when it comes to local elections, that this is really an important layer in the electoral process that we as voters continue to underestimate, and yet it can be it can deliver one of the highest returns to our community, either good or bad, depending on who we elect. Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. As you mentioned, the state elections and how they really have more of a direct impact on our daily lives over federal elections. Can you expound on that just a little bit for us?
Yeah, I want to do that, but first, I want to, if you don't mind, just remind our audience that all 52 of California's U.S. House seats are up for grabs this year.
Wow.
And again, I just want to emphasize that the passage of Proposition 50 in last year's special election, and the need for us to show up and take advantage of filling those seats with like minded people that we know are going to represent our interests in this year's election. And this is going to be the only way that we can help here in California to offset the president's legislative power grab, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Um, and I want to give you some examples that I think are important for our listeners to know in terms of the power that our state government has, and why it's important that we put the right people in these positions. They make decisions that impact our daily lives in terms of civil rights enforcement and remedies. Um, they set the licensing rules for teachers and nurses and contractors, and even the Uber and Lyft drivers that we have zipping up and down our streets and through our communities. They also are responsible for setting the school curriculum. They determine property tax and income taxes. And for the Black community, and I can't emphasize this enough, they set the criminal penalties and the sentencing ranges. So, again, having right minded people in these positions is essential, and we can't get them in the positions if we don't vote.
Yeah, that's so imperative and critical in this political climate that we're facing. Can you give me examples of the kinds of things that can happen when voters don't tune in and participate in midterm elections?
When they don't tune in and participate, then
Yeah.
okay, then it's very possible that we'll end up with leaders that don't represent our interests, that will have rules and regulations, laws that are passed that are counter to what we had hoped to see happen in our area. We can have funding directed away from needs in our community. Those are just some of the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, speaking of the federal level, the recent Supreme Court decision in Louisiana versus Callius triggered a lot of discussion about federal Supreme Court appointments. We also have several candidates for local judges on this year's ballot. Can you comment regarding the importance of judges?
Um, I can, most of us here in this country are more likely to deal with state judges and not the federal ones, unless we have a really big case that ends up in federal court. And so the state judges kind of include our trial court judges that they make the rulings in family courts and criminal and civil courts. And then the next level up from that are the appellate courts, and then we have our own Supreme Court here in the state of California. Each state has a Supreme Court, as well as the Supreme Court that exists at the federal level. And the courts, they decide so many important issues, including, child custody and family law outcomes, criminal convictions, disputes, business disputes, property rights, and so forth. And those judges are elected by the voters. It, the next thing here in California, our Supreme Court justices and our appellate justices are appointed by the governor. So there's another reason that we want to ensure that we have a like-minded governor in place, because he's appointing the appellate court judges and the Supreme Court justices, and we want to make sure that the people that he is appointing are fair and balanced in their assessment of cases that come before them. And I strongly believe that we in the media can really do a much better job on informing the community about the candidates who are running for judges in our counties. And the reason I say that is I don't think that we do enough in this regard. And I know that personally, a couple of election cycles ago, we had a number of judges on the ballot in Riverside County. And I just, out of curiosity, I did a deep dive on these judges. I was curious to know who was backing them and so forth. And what I learned was that nearly every candidate for judge on the ballot was a district attorney or a former district attorney. Every
Oh.
candidate was endorsed by, I'm sorry, when I say district attorney, I meant assistant district attorneys. And then they were all endorsed by the sitting district attorney. They were all endorsed by the police union and the sheriff's union, and they basically had no competition on the ballot. So now, if you just take this to its logical conclusion, um, the person that's charging them is the district attorney that supported them, and the person, and I'm talking about the individual, the person charging an individual is the person that the judge was supported was the person who supported the individual who is now sitting over the case as judge. And also, you think about the fact that the district attorneys that are presenting the case, the deputies or sheriffs that may have arrested the individual also supported the judge. So it makes you wonder how fair a shot these individuals are getting when they stand before these judges. And so that's why I say I think that we in the media can do a much better job at educating voters about who they are voting for in these particular cases. So, finally, I really just want to encourage individuals with to vote in the election to get their ballots uh, in. They must be postmarked before midnight on Tuesday, June 2nd, if they're going to mail them in, or if individuals choose to vote in person at county election offices, that option is also available to voters. They can also do same day registration. So keep that in mind if you haven't already registered. And to find your polling places, or if you have any questions at all about Tuesday's election, all of that information is available on a very user friendly website hosted by the Secretary of State. You can access it at sos.ca.gov. And, Kristen, I would really just like to leave listeners with one final statement, and that is that we have the power to create change through voting. And if voting didn't matter, there would not be such an organized, deliberate, aggressive effort to keep Black people from the polls. Let's vote. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And just to echo those sentiments, let's get out there. Let's vote June 2nd. Check out your local polling place if you're not sure where that is. As Stephanie shared, check out sos.ca.gov /elections. You can also visit your local registrar if you're in the Inland Empire area. Check out the San Bernardino Registrar of Voters located at 777 East Rialto Avenue, San Bernardino, California. Or if you're in Riverside County, you can visit the County of Riverside Registrar of Voters located at 2720 Gateway Drive, Riverside, California. Let's go out there. Let's make a change. Encourage your families, your friends to vote, and let our voices be heard. Take care and have a great night.